Tycoon slaps his pregnant wife in public in front of Mistress, but he didn't understand. Push back the Henderson development another 2 weeks, Alexander instructed his assistant, his voice carrying the confident authority that had become his trademark. Tell them we're finalizing details with our Asian investors. As his assistant nodded and retreated, Alexander turned to face the cityscape, his reflection superimposed on the sprawling metropolis below. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and sharp features had earned him spots on most influential and most eligible lists before his marriage. Now, 7 years later, he and his wife were fixtures in California's social elite. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Grant, your wife is on line 1. Alexander's expression softened momentarily. "Put her through." He picked up the sleek office phone. "Sophia." "Alex, darling." Sophia's voice carried the refined warmth that had captivated Los Angeles society. "Don't forget the charity gala tonight. The Richardsons will be there, and you mentioned wanting to discuss that land acquisition with Jonathan." "Of course. Wouldn't miss it," he replied smoothly, his eyes drifting to the financial reports scattered across his desk. Reports he'd been carefully hiding from everyone, including his board of directors. "Perfect. I've laid out your tuxedo. The new Armani." There was a pause. "Everything all right? You sound tense." Alexander straightened his shoulders and forced warmth into his voice. "Just the usual business battles. Nothing for you to worry about." After they hung up, Alexander slumped into his leather chair, dropping the facade. He pulled open his desk drawer, extracting a half-empty bottle of Macallan whiskey. As he poured a generous amount into a crystal tumbler, his phone vibrated with a text message from a contact listed only as RC. "Meeting confirmed with investors. Tomorrow at 2. Don't be late this time. They're our last chance." Alexander drained the glass in one swallow, the burn of alcohol a welcome distraction from the mounting pressure. 3 failed developments, 2 lawsuits from dissatisfied investors, and a cash flow problem that threatened to expose the house of cards he'd built. Nobody knew, not his board, not his friends in high society, and certainly not Sophia. That evening, the Grant mansion in Bel Air hummed with the precise energy of preparation. Sophia Grant stood in their master closet, applying finishing touches to her appearance. At 35, she remained strikingly beautiful, her chestnut hair swept into an elegant updo revealing diamond earrings. Anniversary gifts from Alexander. "Mrs. Grant," their housekeeper called softly from the doorway. "The car will be ready in 15 minutes. "Thank you, Maria." Sophia smiled warmly. "Is Mr. Grant downstairs yet?" "No, ma'am. He called to say he's running late." Another 30 minutes. Alone again, Sophia's smile faded as she sank onto the velvet bench in her closet. She caught her reflection in the trifold mirror, the image of perfection in a Vera Wang gown, with perfectly applied makeup hiding the exhaustion beneath. The woman who had once been the youngest marketing director at Westfield Communications before giving it all up for Alexander's career. Her phone chimed with congratulatory messages from friends about the feature in California Living magazine. The Grants, California's power couple. The glossy spread showed them at their Malibu beach house, Alexander's arm protectively around her waist, both smiling brilliantly against the Pacific backdrop. What the photos didn't show were the fertility treatments, the quiet disappointments each month, the growing distance between them as Alexander worked later and later. What the magazine didn't print was how Sophia now spent most evenings alone in their enormous house, wondering what had happened to the passionate man who had once promised to conquer the world with her by his side. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her calendar. Doctor's appointments, charity committees, social events, all carefully curated to support Alexander's business relationships and public image. The perfect wife for the perfect tycoon. "Mrs. Grant." Maria appeared again. "Mr. Grant just called. He's on his way." Sophia straightened her posture and reapplied her lipstick. "Thank you, Maria. Please tell James to bring the car around." 20 minutes later, Alexander strode through the front door, already adjusting his bow tie. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing Sophia's cheek, a practiced motion that barely made contact. "The Baker deal needed my personal touch." Sophia caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume and fresh cologne, as though recently applied. She noted his slightly damp hair and the fact that the shirt he wore wasn't the one she'd laid out. Something cold settled in her stomach, but her social smile never faltered. "You look wonderful, darling," she replied, taking his arm. "The Richardsons are expecting us. Shall we?" As they descended the marble staircase toward their waiting car, photographers from a society blog captured their image, California's golden couple heading to another high-profile event. Their smiles perfect, their posture immaculate. She glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m. Alexander had already left for the office without saying goodbye. Again, with a deep breath, Sophia swung her legs over the side of the bed, fighting a sudden wave of nausea that sent her rushing to the bathroom. She barely made it before emptying the contents of her stomach, gripping the marble counter as her knuckles turned white. "That's the third time this week," she whispered to her reflection once the spell had passed. An hour later, sitting in her personal physician's waiting room, Sophia scrolled through emails on her tablet, organizing the upcoming fundraiser for the art museum where she served as board member. Her stomach still felt uneasy, but it was the text notification from her period tracking app that had finally pushed her to make this appointment. "Mrs. Grant," the nurse called with a warm smile. "Dr. Peterson will see you now." Inside the examination room, Sophia perched on the edge of the padded table, her designer sundress and carefully applied makeup at odds with her anxious fidgeting. Dr. Peterson entered with Sophia's chart and a kind smile. "Good morning, Sophia. What brings you in today?" "I've been feeling unwell in the mornings. Nausea, fatigue." She hesitated. "My cycle is late. Almost 2 weeks now." The doctor nodded professionally. "I see you've been through several rounds of fertility treatments over the past few years." "Yes." Sophia's voice caught slightly. "We stopped 6 months ago, Alexander. He said we needed a break from the disappointment." 40 minutes and several tests later, Dr. Peterson returned with a smile that immediately set Sophia's heart racing. "Congratulations, Sophia. You're pregnant. About 6 weeks along, based on your last cycle." The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, beautiful and fragile. Sophia's hand went instinctively to her still flat abdomen. "Pregnant?" she whispered, tears forming. "But we stopped treatments, how?" "Sometimes," Dr. Peterson said gently. "Nature works in its own time. Your body may have finally adjusted after the treatments. It happens more often than you might think." Sophia's mind raced through calculations. 6 weeks ago had been their anniversary weekend in Napa Valley. Alexander had been attentive, romantic even, a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with. They'd talked about trying again naturally, letting go of the clinical appointments and scheduled intimacy that had dominated their marriage. "I'd like to do an ultrasound today if you're comfortable with that," Dr. Peterson continued. "And we should discuss prenatal vitamins, especially given your previous difficulties." Sophia nodded, still processing the miracle. After years of negative tests, carefully timed procedures, and private tears, she was carrying their child. Alexander would be Alexander. Her joy faltered momentarily as she remembered his increasingly distant behavior, the late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply on his calendar. "Does your husband know you suspected you might be pregnant?" Dr. Peterson asked, preparing the ultrasound machine. "No," Sophia admitted. "He's been under tremendous pressure at work lately. I didn't want to raise his hopes until I was sure." As the cold gel touched her abdomen and the monitor flickered to life, Sophia made a decision. She would tell Alexander tonight, create a special moment worthy of the news. Perhaps this child would be the bridge back to the connection they'd lost somewhere between board meetings and charity galas. "There," Dr. Peterson pointed to a tiny flickering pulse on the screen. "That's your baby's heartbeat, strong and regular." Tears flowed freely down Sophia's cheeks as she stared at the tiny life they had created. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually real." That afternoon, Sophia moved through the gourmet kitchens of the Grant mansion with uncharacteristic energy, directing the staff to prepare Alexander's favorite meal. A ribeye steak with truffle butter, and the vintage Bordeaux they discovered on their honeymoon in France. She selected crystal candlesticks for the intimate table setting in their garden terrace, where Jasmine climbed the trellis and the city lights would twinkle below them as she shared the news. Mrs. Grant, Maria approached tentatively. The florist delivered these for the table arrangement. Sophia smiled at the perfect white roses. Thank you, Maria. They're beautiful. As she arranged the flowers herself, something her mother had taught her was too important to delegate. Sophia's phone chimed with a text from her assistant. Just confirming your attendance at the museum board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Agenda attached. She replied quickly, then hesitated before opening her calendar app to schedule her next prenatal appointment. As she scrolled through the shared family calendar, her finger froze over an entry for tonight that hadn't been there that morning. 7:30 p.m. Dinner with RC and investors, NoBU. Alexander had made plans without telling her. On the night she had planned to tell him about their miracle. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her phone to call him. Straight to voicemail. Alex, it's me. I had hoped we could have dinner at home tonight. I have something important to tell you. Please call me back. She hung up, staring at the prepared table setting, the candles, the special wine already breathing, the moment she had imagined. His face lighting up with joy, perhaps tears in his usually stoic eyes, began to dissolve. Sophia sank into a chair, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. It's okay, she whispered to the life inside her. Your father is just busy. He's going to be so happy once he knows about you. As if to distract herself, she reached for Alexander's tablet, which he'd left on the counter that morning. A rare oversight for someone so private about his business dealings. Perhaps she could email his assistant to reschedule his dinner. The screen came to life, displaying his last opened application, his messaging system. Before she could navigate away, a notification appeared at the top of the screen. Rebecca Chun, I've booked the private room at the back. The investors won't linger after dinner. Meet me at my place after, wearing that red dress you like. Sophia stared at the message, her heart suddenly pounding in her ears. With shaking fingers, she tapped on the conversation, scrolling up to see months of exchanges. Intimate, familiar messages that could leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Photos, meeting arrangements, late-night conversations. Miss you. Last night was incredible. These investors are our ticket out of this mess. Be charming. Tonight. The tablet slipped from Sophia's hands, clattering onto the marble countertop as the perfect world she had constructed around herself began to splinter and crack. Maria, she called, her voice unnaturally calm despite the storm raging inside her. Please have James bring the car around in an hour, and cancel the dinner preparations. Mrs. Grant, James, their driver for 7 years, caught her eye in the rearview mirror. We're approaching NoBU. Would you like me to drop you at the front entrance? Sophia's hand instinctively touched her stomach, seeking courage from the tiny life within. No, James. Pull around to the side where you can see the entrance. I'd like to observe for a moment. If James found the request unusual, his professional demeanor revealed nothing. Of course, ma'am. As the car eased into a discreet position with a clear view of the restaurant's entrance, Sophia fought to control her breathing. 8 years of marriage, 3 years of fertility treatments, countless public appearances together. All potentially undermined by whatever was happening behind those restaurant doors. James, would you mind giving me some privacy? She asked softly. Certainly, Mrs. Grant. I'll wait outside. Take all the time you need. Once alone, Sophia allowed a single sob to escape before composing herself again. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly what she was facing. Her phone buzzed with Alexander's response to her earlier message. Can't do dinner tonight. Critical investor meeting. Don't wait up. No apology. No explanation. Just the dismissive tone that had become increasingly common in their communications. Sophia was about to reply when movement at the restaurant entrance caught her eye. A slim woman with striking features stepped out, her glossy black hair falling in a sleek curtain down her back. She wore a form-fitting red dress that accentuated her athletic figure, and even from this distance, Sophia could see the confidence in her posture as she checked her watch and scanned the arriving cars. Rebecca Chin. It had to be. Seeing her in person was a fresh wound atop the already bleeding revelation. A moment later, Alexander's Aston Martin pulled up. Sophia watched as her husband emerged, immaculately dressed in a suit she didn't recognize. He approached Rebecca with the easy familiarity of lovers, his hand lingering at the small of her back as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. Something in Sophia broke and reconstituted itself in that moment. A hardening, a resolve crystallizing within her chest where hurt had been fermenting. "James," she called, opening her door. "I'll be going into the restaurant after all." Inside NoBU, the low lighting and ambient music created the illusion of privacy for its elite clientele. Rebecca Chun led Alexander through the main dining area toward a private room at the back, her hand casually linked with his. "The Kim brothers are already here," she murmured. "They're bringing $20 million to the table if you can convince them the Henderson project will break ground next month." Alexander's jaw tightened. "It has to. We're out of options." Rebecca stopped, turning to face him. At 28, she possessed both the sharp intellect that had propelled her through Wharton Business School and the political connections from her family's shipping empire that made her invaluable to Alexander's precarious financial situation. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, studying his face. "You look tense." Alexander straightened his tie. "I've closed bigger deals under worse circumstances. Not with bankruptcy lurking around the corner," she replied, her voice low but firm. "These investors are my family connections, Alex. My reputation is on the line." He caught her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips. "Have I ever let you down?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Frequently, but you always make it up to me." Before Alexander could respond, her expression changed, eyes focusing on something behind him. "Alex," she whispered urgently. "Your wife is here." Alexander turned sharply, disbelief crossing his features as he saw Sophia standing near the host's stand, her blue dress making her stand out like a sapphire among coal. Even from across the room, he could see the unusual rigidity in her posture, the uncharacteristic hardness in her typically warm eyes. "Shit," he muttered. "Stay here. I'll handle this." As Alexander crossed the restaurant, conversations dimmed around him. Several patrons recognized the power couple, their attention drawn to the unexpected drama unfolding in the exclusive venue. "Sophia," Alexander said as he reached her, his voice controlled but his eyes darting nervously to the private room where investors waited. "What are you doing here?" Sophia met his gaze with remarkable composure. "I thought I'd join my husband for dinner. Is that unusual?" "This is a business meeting," he replied, lowering his voice and taking her elbow to guide her toward the exit. "Critical investors. You know how these things work." "Do I?" Sophia didn't move, instead looking pointedly toward Rebecca, who remained visible across the restaurant. "And does your business associate always wear red dresses for investor meetings?" Alexander's face hardened. "You're making a scene." "Am I? I thought I was simply joining my husband for dinner." Her voice remained steady, though anyone looking closely would see her hands trembling slightly. "Who is she, Alexander? This isn't the time or place." "I saw the messages." Sophia cut him off, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow more devastating than if she'd shouted. "All of them." Alexander's face drained of color before a mask of control slipped back into place. "We'll discuss this at home. Like we've discussed everything else lately? In passing, between your late nights and early mornings." A maitre d' approached cautiously. "Mr. Grant, is everything all right? Your investors are waiting in the private room." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Tell them I'll be right there." He turned back to Sophia, lowering his voice. "I have millions riding on tonight. Go home. We'll talk later." "Will we talk about the company's financial troubles too?" Sophia asked, watching his expression shift from anger to shock. "Oh yes, I know about those as well. It seems there's quite a lot you've been keeping from me." Before Alexander could respond, Rebecca appeared at his side, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension radiating from both Grants. "Mrs. Grant," she extended her hand. "Rebecca Chin, I've heard so much about you. Your work with the Children's Hospital Foundation is remarkable." Sophia stared at the outstretched hand for a beat before accepting it with glacial politeness. "Ms. Chen, I wish I could say the same, but it seems my husband prefers to keep certain associates private." Rebecca withdrew her hand, her composure slipping only momentarily. "I'm Alexander's investment partner. We've been working together to secure funding for Grant Industries' new developments. Among other things, apparently," Sophia replied, her gaze flicking between them. Alexander stepped forward, his patience evaporating. "Sophia, enough. Go home. Now. The investors are getting restless," Rebecca murmured to Alexander. "We need to start the presentation." Alexander nodded curtly. "Give me 1 minute." As Rebecca retreated, he turned back to Sophia, his voice low and threatening. "You've made your point. Whatever you think you know, this isn't helping. There are jobs and millions of dollars at stake. Don't destroy everything we've built because you're feeling neglected." The casual cruelty of his dismissal hit Sophia like a physical blow. She had come seeking answers, perhaps even hoping for denial or some explanation that might salvage what remained of their marriage. Instead, she found only contempt and impatience. "What we've built," she repeated softly. "That's interesting phrasing, considering I gave up my entire career to support yours. To be the perfect wife for the perfect tycoon." Alexander checked his watch, his agitation growing. "I don't have time for this. The car is outside. Go home." As he turned to walk away, Sophia found her voice again, strengthened by the life growing inside her. "I'm pregnant, Alexander." He froze mid-step, his back still to her, shoulders suddenly rigid. "What did you say?" he asked without turning around. "I'm 6 weeks pregnant. That's what I wanted to tell you tonight. Over the dinner I had planned at home." Alexander slowly turned, his expression unreadable as his eyes dropped to her still flat stomach. For a moment, something like wonder flickered across his face, the ghost of the man she had married appearing briefly behind the mask of the tycoon. That's impossible," he finally said. "After all the failed treatments." "Not impossible," Sophia replied. "Just a miracle with terrible timing." From across the restaurant, Rebecca called out, "Alex, they're threatening to leave. We need you now." The spell broke. Alexander's face hardened once more as he glanced between Rebecca and Sophia, the momentary vulnerability evaporating like morning mist. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his voice oddly distant. "This meeting could save or destroy everything. I need to go." As he walked away, returning to Rebecca and their waiting investors, Sophia stood alone in the bustling restaurant, one hand instinctively protective over her abdomen. The diamond necklace at her throat felt suddenly heavy, constricting, like the life she had so carefully constructed around herself. "Don't worry," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll figure this out, with or without him." On the 4th evening, Sophia sat alone in the garden terrace where she had planned to announce her pregnancy, staring at the gathering twilight. Her phone chimed with a message from Dr. Peterson's office confirming her prenatal appointment for the following morning. The tiny life inside her remained her anchor in the storm, the one certainty in a world suddenly rendered foreign and treacherous. The sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the house, earlier than Alexander had returned in days. Footsteps approached, and Sophia straightened her posture, steeling herself. Alexander appeared at the terrace doorway, still in his business suit but with his tie loosened and collar unbuttoned. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than she'd ever noticed before. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gravelly. Sophia gestured to the chair across from her. "I've been waiting for that for days." Alexander sat heavily, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The Kim deal went through. We secured the funding." "Congratulations," she replied coldly. "Is that what you came to tell me?" "No." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Rebecca is a business associate who became more. It started 8 months ago during the Shanghai conference. The confirmation, though expected, still felt like ice water in her veins. 8 months, Sophia repeated, while I was still undergoing fertility treatments. Alexander had the decency to look away. It wasn't planned. Her family connections offered access to investors we desperately needed. One dinner became another, and then you betrayed our marriage, Sophia finished for him. Don't diminish what you did with corporate speak, Alexander. You had an affair while I was pumping myself full of hormones trying to give us a child. The company was failing, he shot back, a flash of the familiar temper breaking through his controlled facade. Do you understand what that means? Everything I've built, everything we've enjoyed was about to collapse. I did what I had to do, including sleeping with her? It's complicated. Sophia laughed bitterly. It always is for men like you. A tense silence stretched. Between them, in the distance, the lights of Los Angeles began to twinkle as darkness fell more completely. What happens now? Alexander finally asked. You tell me. I'm still processing the fact that my husband has been lying to me for the better part of a year. That my pregnancy, which should have been the happiest news of our lives, is now tangled up in your infidelity. Alexander's eyes flickered to her stomach. About that, are you certain? After all the specialists said it was unlikely without continued treatments. Are you questioning if it's yours? Sophia's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm asking a logical question, he replied defensively. The timing is convenient. Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone terrace. Get out, Sophia. Get out of my sight before I say something we both regret. Her voice trembled with barely contained rage. I have an appointment with Dr. Peterson tomorrow morning. Feel free to join me if you want proof of your paternity, along with confirmation of your moral bankruptcy. Alexander rose slowly. This discussion isn't over. No, she agreed. But it is for tonight. After he left, Sophia remained in the garden until the chill night air forced her inside. She slept in the guest bedroom, unable to face their marital bed with the weight of his betrayal still fresh. The following morning, Sophia sat in her Range Rover outside Dr. Peterson's office, gathering courage to face the appointment alone when a familiar Aston Martin pulled into the adjacent parking space. Alexander emerged, dressed casually in slacks and a cashmere sweater, his version of informal attire. They walked into the medical building together in silence, the tension between them palpable enough to draw curious glances from the receptionist. Mr. and Mrs. Grant. Dr. Peterson greeted them warmly, either oblivious to or professionally ignoring the frost between them. Lovely to have you join us today, Mr. Grant. First baby appointments are always special. Alexander nodded stiffly. Thank you for accommodating me on short notice. Once in the examination room, Sophia changed into a gown while Alexander stood awkwardly by the window, checking his phone repeatedly. Dr. Peterson entered with her characteristic efficiency. Today we'll do another ultrasound to check development and discuss your first trimester care plan. She paused, looking between them. Any questions before we begin? Yes, Alexander interjected before Sophia could speak. We'd like confirmation of the pregnancy timeline. When exactly did conception occur? Dr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor never faltered. Based on Mrs. Grant's hormone levels and the development observed in our first ultrasound, conception occurred approximately 6 to 7 weeks ago. I can be more precise after today's examination. The ultrasound proceeded in tense silence until the rhythmic whooshing sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Dr. Peterson pointed to the monitor where a tiny form was visible. There's your baby, measuring exactly as expected for a 6-week 3-day embryo. Strong heartbeat. Sophia's eyes filled with tears despite herself, the miracle of the life within her momentarily overshadowing the pain of her crumbling marriage. She glanced at Alexander, whose expression had softened as he stared at the screen. That's remarkable, he said quietly. Dr. Peterson smiled. First heartbeat is always a magical moment. Now, Given Mrs. Grant's age and your previous fertility challenges, I'd like to schedule more frequent monitoring. Let's look at dates for your next appointment. As the doctor turned to her computer, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his posture immediately stiffening. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward the door. Business emergency. Dr. Peterson looked surprised. We're nearly finished, Mr. Grant. Just a few more minutes. It's urgent, he insisted, not meeting Sophia's eyes. I'll wait in the car. The door closed behind him with a decisive click. I apologize for my husband, Sophia said quietly. His work demands are significant. Dr. Peterson's expression was compassionate but neutral. No apology necessary. Let's focus on you and this little one. How are you feeling? 20 minutes later, Sophia emerged from the medical building with a folder of prenatal information and a new prescription for vitamins. She spotted Alexander pacing beside his car, engaged in an intense phone conversation. No, absolutely not, he was saying as she approached. Tell them we need another week. Yes, I understand the implications. Look, Rebecca, I'm handling a personal matter right now. At the mention of Rebecca's name, Sophia stopped, watching her husband's animated gestures and hearing the intimate familiarity in his tone. Even now, hours after confronting him about the affair, he was still in constant contact with his mistress. Alexander spotted her and quickly ended his call. How did it go? As if you care, Sophia replied, moving toward her own vehicle. That's not fair. I do care. This is my child too. Is it? You seemed to have doubts yesterday. Alexander caught her arm. Sophia, this situation is complicated. The company is still in a precarious position. These investors are demanding constant updates, meetings, and Rebecca? What is she demanding? His jaw tightened. She's crucial to this deal. Her family connections? Save it, Sophia interrupted. I'm not one of your shareholders to be placated with corporate jargon. They stood in the parking lot, two figures frozen in a tableau of domestic collapse, when Sophia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Helen Montgomery, chair of the hospital charity gala scheduled for that evening. I need to take this, Sophia said, echoing Alexander's earlier words with bitter irony. Alexander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. We're attending the gala tonight. Correct. I am, Sophia replied before answering her phone. Helen. Hello? Yes. Final preparations are underway. Of course, I'll be there early to oversee the seating arrangements. As she spoke, Alexander's phone buzzed again. He read the message, his expression darkening. I need to go, he said when Sophia ended her call. Crisis at the office. We'll continue this discussion tonight. Will we? Or will you be too busy with your business associate? Alexander's face hardened. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Sophia replied. But we'll maintain appearances tonight because that's what we do. Isn't it? The perfect power couple of California. This isn't the place for this conversation. It never is, Alexander. That's the problem. He stared at her for a long moment before turning toward his car. I'll meet you at the gala. 7 o'clock. As his Aston Martin peeled out of the parking lot, Sophia stood alone, one hand protectively over her abdomen while the other clutched the folder containing images of their child. A child conceived during what she now recognized as the dying gasps of their marriage. A child who would be born into a world nothing like the one she had imagined. Helen, everything looks magnificent, she complimented the committee chair while scanning the growing crowd. No sign of Alexander yet, though he had texted an hour ago promising to arrive by 8. Helen Montgomery, a silver-haired society matron with razor-sharp instincts, followed Sophia's gaze. No Alexander yet? The Bennetts were asking about him. Something about that new development in Malibu. He's finalizing an important international investment, Sophia replied smoothly. He'll be here soon. As the evening progressed, Sophia moved through her hostess duties with practiced elegance. Check on the silent auction. Welcome the mayor. Ensure the hospital director was seated with the evening's largest potential donors. all while the constant refrain of "Where's Alexander?" echoed in her wake. By 9:30, the dinner service was concluding, and the program would soon begin. Sophia checked her phone again. 3 unanswered messages to Alexander, his own responses growing increasingly terse. Dealing with investor concerns. Start without me. Might be very late. Don't wait. Rebecca translating for Korean investors. Critical situation. The last message sent a fresh wave of anger through her body. Even tonight, at an event she had spent months organizing, where his presence as half of Los Angeles's most celebrated power couple was expected, he chose Rebecca and his business crisis over his obligations, over her. Mrs. Grant. A server appeared at her elbow. The hotel manager would like to speak with you. He says it's urgent. Sophia followed the server to the hotel lobby where Marcus Reynolds, the longtime manager of the Beverly Hills Hotel, waited with a concerned expression. Mrs. Grant, I apologize for interrupting your event, he began, his voice low. There's been an incident at Polo Lounge. Mr. Grant is involved, and I thought you should be informed discreetly before it escalates further. Sophia's stomach tightened. What kind of incident? Perhaps it would be better if you saw for yourself. This way, please. With growing dread, Sophia followed Reynolds through the hotel's elegant corridors toward the famous Polo Lounge. As they approached, she could hear raised voices, one unmistakably Alexander's. This is absolutely unacceptable. Alexander's voice boomed from inside. Do you know who I am? Reynolds paused outside the entrance. He arrived about an hour ago with a female companion. They were meeting with 2 Asian gentlemen. The conversation became heated, and Mr. Grant has had several drinks. Sophia steeled herself and entered the lounge. Near the bar, Alexander stood toe-to-toe with a distinguished older Asian man, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. Rebecca stood nearby, her expression mortified as she attempted to mediate in rapid Korean. 2 security guards hovered uncertainly at the periphery. Alexander, Sophia called sharply, professional smile still somehow in place despite the horrified embarrassment flooding through her. He turned, momentarily thrown off balance. Whether from surprise or intoxication, Sophia couldn't tell. Sophia, he slurred slightly, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be at your little charity thing? The dismissive tone, the public spectacle, the humiliation of seeing him drunk with Rebecca while hundreds of their social peers waited in the ballroom. Something snapped inside Sophia. The gala you promised to attend? Yes, it's happening right now while you're making a scene in the hotel bar. Her voice was controlled but ice-cold. What's going on here? The older Asian man spoke up, his English precise and clipped. Your husband has misrepresented the status of his company's permits for the Henderson development. We discovered this discrepancy tonight when our legal team completed their review. Rebecca stepped forward, her professional demeanor at odds with the tense situation. Mrs. Grant, this is Mr. Kim and his brother, our potential investors from Seoul. We were trying to clarify a misunderstanding about the project timeline. Misunderstanding? Mr. Kim's eyebrow arched. Your husband claimed permits were secured when they've been denied twice. That is fraud, not misunderstanding. Alexander lunged forward, jabbing a finger toward Mr. Kim. The permits are a formality. My connections at City Hall have guaranteed approval. Your money was never at risk. Alexander. Sophia grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. You're making things worse. He yanked his arm from her grasp with unexpected force. Don't interfere in business you don't understand. The sudden movement caught Sophia off balance. She stumbled backward, catching herself against a bar stool as several patrons gasped. Rebecca stepped between them, facing Alexander. Alex, you need to calm down, she said firmly. You're destroying everything we've worked for. The Kims exchanged glances, clearly disgusted by the display. The elder brother spoke in Korean to Rebecca, who responded with a deep bow and apologetic tone. What's he saying? Alexander demanded, swaying slightly. They're withdrawing from the deal, Rebecca replied, her professional veneer cracking to reveal genuine distress. All 20 million. They believe you've been dishonest. That's ridiculous. Alexander's voice rose again. Tell them they can't back out now. We have an agreement. Not anymore, Mr. Kim said coldly. And I will be informing other potential investors of this experience. Your reputation in Asian markets is finished, Mr. Grant. As the Kim brothers turned to leave, Alexander lunged forward again, but security was faster this time, stepping between them. You're ruining me, Alexander shouted after them. This project will revolutionize the market. Sophia watched in horror as her husband, the composed, confident tycoon who commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, descended into a drunken, desperate spectacle. The other patrons in the polo lounge stared openly now, several with phones discreetly recording the scene. Alexander, that's enough, Sophia hissed, acutely aware of the audience. We need to go. Now. Don't tell me what to do, he snapped, turning his anger toward her. This is your fault. If you hadn't shown up at NoBU making a scene, Rebecca could have closed this deal days ago. Rebecca's eyes widened. Alex, stop. You're drunk. And you, he turned on Rebecca. All your promises about your family connections. Trust me, Alex. I can deliver the investors. What good are you if you can't even control your own people? The hurt that flashed across Rebecca's face was unmistakable, quickly replaced by cold fury. My people? Is that how you see me and my connections? Just your entry point to Asian markets? That's not what I meant. I think it's exactly what you meant. Rebecca gathered her purse and jacket. You're on your own, Alexander. Good luck explaining to your board why the Kim investment fell through. As Rebecca stormed out, Alexander seemed to deflate, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his alcohol-clouded mind. The polo lounge had grown eerily quiet, with every eye trained on the disintegrating power couple. Sophia approached her husband carefully, her voice low. We need to leave. There are 300 people in the ballroom waiting for us to appear on stage. Pull yourself together. I've lost everything, he muttered, suddenly looking aged and defeated. $20 million gone. The Henderson project gone. And whose fault is that? Sophia couldn't contain her bitter response. Your lies are catching up to you, Alexander. All of them. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Don't push me, Sophia. Not tonight. Or what? You'll humiliate me further? I think we've reached the limit on that particular score. Hotel security approached cautiously. Mr. Grant, Mrs. Grant, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private? Alexander ignored them, his attention fixed on Sophia with growing hostility. You've never understood the pressure I'm under, the risks I take to maintain our lifestyle, to give you everything you want. What I wanted was honesty, Sophia replied, struggling to maintain her composure. What I wanted was a faithful husband who showed up when he promised he would. Not this. She gestured at his disheveled state. So perfect, he sneered. Always so perfect and proper. The flawless Sophia Grant. Tell me, what will your charity friends think when they learn their golden boy has been lying about everything? That we're one step away from bankruptcy. Mr. Grant, the security guard insisted more firmly. We need to move this conversation elsewhere. Alexander whirled on the guard. Don't touch me. Do you know how much money I've spent in this hotel over the years? Sophia stepped between them, desperately trying to defuse the situation. Alexander, please. Think about the baby. Think about our future. The baby. He let out a harsh laugh. The miracle baby that appears just as my company is collapsing? How convenient. Sophia froze, the cruel implication hanging in the air between them. Around them, several patrons gasped audibly. Marcus Reynolds stepped forward, his expression grave. Mr. Grant, I must insist that you leave the premises immediately. Insist. Alexander's temper exploded. You work for me. This entire city works for me. Alexander. Sophia grabbed his arm again, trying to pull him toward the exit before he could make the situation even worse. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Sophia would struggle to sequence the events properly. Alexander turned, his arm swinging out in rage. Whether he intended to strike her or simply shake her off, the result was the same. His open palm connected with her face with enough force to snap her head sideways. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly silent lounge. Sophia stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek in shock. For a moment, no one moved. Not the security guards, not the hotel manager, not the patrons with their phones now openly recording. Alexander himself seemed most shocked of all, staring at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. Sophia, I didn't mean to. The flash of a camera cut him off as someone captured the moment. Los Angeles's real estate tycoon standing over his pregnant wife, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek, tears welling in her eyes. Mrs. Grant, are you all right? Reynolds was at her side immediately, as security finally moved to restrain Alexander. Sophia couldn't answer. The physical pain was nothing compared to the public humiliation, the complete destruction of the careful facade she had maintained for years. In an instant, everything had changed, not just her marriage, but her entire identity as half of California's perfect power couple. Get him out of here, she finally managed, her voice barely audible. And call my driver. As security escorted a suddenly subdued Alexander toward the exit, Sophia became aware of buzzing phones throughout the lounge. The news spreading, videos being shared, her carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. Mrs. Grant, Reynolds spoke gently. Should we call a doctor? Given your condition. Sophia straightened her posture, one hand still pressed to her stinging cheek, the other instinctively protective over her abdomen. No, but I need a moment before I return to the gala. The gala? Reynolds looked astonished. Surely you're not planning to continue with the evening? Sophia met his gaze with newfound steel in her eyes. 300 of Los Angeles's most influential people are waiting to hear about children fighting for their lives. They will not be disappointed because my husband couldn't control himself. She turned to the stunned onlookers, many still holding their phones. I would appreciate your discretion, though I realize that's likely a futile request. Without waiting for responses, she walked with measured steps toward the ladies' room, her emerald gown sweeping behind her, her head held high despite the tears now freely streaming down her face. Inside the empty bathroom, she finally allowed herself a moment of complete breakdown, leaning against the marble counter as sobs racked her body. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, a red mark blooming where Alexander's hand had struck her, eyes filled with a pain deeper than physical discomfort. It's okay, she whispered to her unborn child, pressing her hand against her stomach. We're going to be okay. Her phone began to vibrate incessantly with notifications. She glanced down to see messages pouring in. Concerned friends at the gala, Helen asking where she was, and worst of all, a text from her assistant. Video of incident in Polo Lounge already online. Media calling for comment. What should I tell them? Sophia closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. The perfect life she had constructed was shattered beyond repair. Whatever came next would bear no resemblance to the future she had imagined. But first, she had responsibilities to fulfill. With practiced movements, she repaired her makeup, covering the redness on her cheek with foundation and concealer. She reapplied her lipstick, fixed her hair, and straightened her shoulders. The woman who emerged from the bathroom 5 minutes later looked every inch the poised society leader she had always been, only the haunted look in her eyes betraying the trauma she had just experienced. Her phone lay face down on the nightstand, silenced after hours of incessant buzzing. Before turning it off completely, she'd glimpsed the notifications. 37 missed calls, 64 text messages, and an explosion of news alerts bearing headlines she couldn't bring herself to read. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophia. Her mother's voice carried through the door. Darling, are you awake? Come in, Mom. Eleanor Chin Wilson entered carrying a breakfast tray, her elegant features tight with concern. At 65, she remained a formidable presence. Former international corporate lawyer turned philanthropist, who had balanced career success with raising Sophia and her brother. Now she moved with careful precision, as if her daughter might shatter at any sudden movement. I brought you some tea and toast. You need to eat something. She set the tray on the bedside table and perched on the edge of the bed. Your father's been fielding calls from the family attorney all morning. Sophia sat up slowly, wincing at the dull ache in her cheek where Alexander's hand had connected. What are they saying? Eleanor hesitated. The video is everywhere. Entertainment sites, news outlets, social media. She took Sophia's hand. Your father wants to release a statement, but we agreed nothing would happen without your approval. And Alexander? Have you heard from him? He called the house phone twice. Your father refused to speak with him. Eleanor's expression hardened. That man will never set foot in this house again. Sophia reached for her phone, finally ready to face reality. When she powered it on, the barrage of notifications made the device vibrate continuously for nearly 30 seconds. Oh God, she whispered as she scrolled through headlines. Grant Empire crumbling. Tycoon strikes pregnant wife at charity gala. Breaking. Grant Industries stock plummets 30% following CEO's public meltdown. Exclusive. Inside the secret financial troubles behind the Grant fortune, Grant's mistress identified as Chinese business consultant Rebecca Chun. Accompanying the top story was a still image from the video. Alexander's hand connecting with her face, the shock evident in her expression, captured for the world's consumption. Sophia felt physically ill seeing the private moment of humiliation packaged for public entertainment. There's something else, Eleanor said gently. Alexander has called a press conference for noon today. What? Sophia looked up sharply. Why wasn't I informed? His team announced it an hour ago. That's why the attorney has been calling. Sophia glanced at the clock. 10:42 a.m. Just over an hour before Alexander would stand before cameras and, what? Justify his actions? Apologize? Blame her? I need to shower, she said, suddenly galvanized. And I need clothes. Something professional. Eleanor looked startled. You're not thinking of attending? I have to. Sophia pushed back the covers and stood, swaying slightly as a wave of morning sickness threatened to overtake her. I won't let him control the narrative. Not anymore. At 11:55 a.m., Sophia's town car pulled up to the back entrance of Grant Industries headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. Reporters swarmed the building, but her father's head of security, a former Marine who had protected the family for 2 decades, had arranged for her to enter undetected through the underground parking garage. In the elevator riding up to the executive floor, Sophia caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. She barely recognized herself. Gone was the softness that had characterized her public persona for years. In its place was a woman in a crisp navy suit, hair pulled back severely, minimal makeup unable to fully conceal the faint bruising on her left cheekbone. Her eyes held a determination that surprised even her. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, Alexander's assistant Jennifer gasped audibly. Mrs. Grant, we weren't expecting you. Clearly, Sophia replied coolly. Where is he? In the boardroom with legal and PR. The press conference is set up in conference room A. Jennifer hesitated. Mrs. Grant, they've prepared a statement that doesn't include your presence. This might not be. Thank you, Jennifer. Sophia cut her off. I'll find my way. As she approached the boardroom, raised voices filtered through the partially open door. We can't admit liability. A male voice she recognized as Charles Weinstein, Grant Industries General Counsel. The stock has already tanked 30%. If you apologize outright, you're confirming wrongdoing. It's on video, Charles. Alexander's voice, sounding exhausted. The entire world saw me strike my pregnant wife, which is why we emphasize stress, temporary impairment from medication and alcohol, and the extreme provocation of learning about financial espionage. Financial espionage? Sophia pushed the door open fully, causing all heads to turn toward her. Is that what you're planning to call my presence at a hotel restaurant? The boardroom fell silent. 6 people sat around the table, Alexander, flanked by his legal team, PR director, and 2 senior executives. Alexander himself looked like he'd aged years overnight. Unshaven, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, his usual confidence replaced by a defeated slump. "Sophia?" He straightened, clearly shocked by her appearance. "What are you doing here?" "Ensuring you don't compound last night's disgrace with more lies." She stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. "Financial espionage? Really?" Charles Weinstein recovered first. "Mrs. Grant, with all due respect, this is a private company meeting to address a sensitive corporate matter." "A sensitive corporate matter involving my face and my child?" Sophia smiled without warmth. "I'm still a Grant, and my name is still on the charitable foundation that provides half your corporate tax shield. I believe that entitles me to a seat at this table." She pulled out an empty chair and sat down, her posture impeccable despite the turmoil churning inside her. "What's your plan, Alexander? Blame me for the collapse of the Kim deal? Suggest I deliberately sabotaged negotiations? Or will you play the victim of a conniving wife who humiliated you publicly?" Alexander winced. "That's not—" "Actually," Charles interjected, sliding a document toward her. "We were hoping you'd sign this joint statement." Sophia scanned the carefully crafted paragraphs, her disbelief growing with each sentence. The statement portrayed a couple under tremendous stress, both making regrettable choices in the heat of passion, mutually committed to healing their marriage away from the public eye. "This is fiction," she said flatly, pushing the paper back. "I won't sign it." "Be reasonable, Sophia." Alexander leaned forward. "We have a company to save, shareholders to appease. Everything we've built is at stake." "Everything you've built," she corrected. "Built on lies, apparently. How long has Grant Industries been in financial trouble? How many investors have you misled? Was Rebecca part of your corporate strategy from the beginning? Or just a convenient bonus?" "That's uncalled for," Alexander snapped. "You know nothing about the business challenges I've faced. Because you chose not to share them with me." Sophia's composure cracked slightly. "I was your wife, Alexander, your partner. But you treated me like a decorative accessory, useful for galas and photo ops but not worthy of knowing the truth." The PR director cleared her throat. "We're live in 30 minutes. We need a unified approach." "There will be no unity," Sophia stated firmly. "I'm not participating in this charade." Alexander's expression hardened. "Then why are you here?" "To tell you in person that I've retained counsel. Divorce papers will be filed this afternoon." The announcement landed like a grenade in the center of the table. Alexander's face drained of color. "You can't be serious. After everything we've built." "After everything you've destroyed," she corrected. "One slap didn't end our marriage, Alexander. The lies did. The betrayal did. The complete disregard for our vows did." "Think about the baby," he urged, desperation entering his voice. "Our child deserves a family. Our child deserves better than a father who strikes its mother." Sophia's hand moved protectively to her abdomen. "Better than growing up in a house built on deception." Charles Weinstein scribbled something on his legal pad. "Mrs. Grant, while emotions are understandably high, I must advise you that making public statements about pending legal matters could jeopardize any settlement." "I don't care about the settlement," Sophia interrupted. "Keep your money, your houses, your struggling company. I want nothing from you except my freedom and the assurance that my child will be protected from your influence." Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Everyone out. I need to speak with my wife alone." The team exchanged uncertain glances but complied, filing silently from the room until only Alexander and Sophia remained, facing each other across the polished boardroom table. "You don't mean this," Alexander said once they were alone, his voice softer. "We can get past this. Couples therapy, time away together. This pregnancy is the miracle we've been praying for." "The miracle I prayed for," Sophia corrected, "while you were building a separate life with another woman." "Rebecca meant nothing," he insisted. "A business arrangement that evolved. But you're my wife, the mother of my child." Sophia studied his face, searching for any trace of the man she had fallen in love with. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about your affair or that slap. It's about years of neglect. Years of treating me as an accessory to your success rather than a partner in life. That's not fair. I gave you everything. Except honesty. Except respect. Sophia shook her head sadly. When did you stop seeing me as a person, Alexander? When did I become just another asset to be managed? His expression shifted, desperation giving way to calculation. The press will crucify me if you file for divorce now. The company might not survive. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Don't put that on me, Sophia replied firmly. Your choices led us here, not mine. Alexander moved around the table toward her, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone that had closed countless business deals. Give me 6 months. Just 6 months to stabilize the company. Find new investors. After the baby is born, if you still want to leave, I won't contest anything. Full settlement, no custody battles. She stepped back, maintaining distance between them. And in those 6 months, what role do you see for me? The forgiving wife on your arm at business dinners? The silent partner who pretends our marriage isn't over? Is it really so much to ask? After 8 years together. For a moment, Sophia hesitated. Despite everything, part of her still cared what happened to Alexander, or perhaps more accurately, to the man she had once believed him to be. Thousands of employees did depend on Grant Industries for their livelihoods. The company's collapse would ripple through Los Angeles's economy. But looking at Alexander now, seeing the calculation behind his pleading eyes, she recognized the manipulation that had always been there, hidden beneath charm and confidence. My attorney will contact yours this afternoon, she said firmly. I won't be part of your press conference or any public statement. Whatever story you choose to tell it without me. Sophia, please. I spent years molding myself into the perfect corporate wife, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. Supporting your dreams, hosting your clients, organizing your charity events. I lost myself in the process. I won't lose one more day, Alexander. Not for you. Not for anyone. As she turned to leave, Alexander called after her, his voice cracking. What will you do? Where will you go? Sophia paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For the first time in my adult life, that's none of your concern. She walked out without looking back, past the startled executives waiting in the hallway, past Jennifer's worried expression, through the executive floor where hushed conversations stopped abruptly at her appearance. In the elevator, she finally allowed her perfect posture to slump slightly, exhaustion catching up with her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Attorney confirmed. Papers ready. You're doing the right thing, sweetheart. As the elevator descended, Sophia's reflection showed tears forming in her eyes. Not for the marriage she was leaving, but for the years spent living someone else's idea of perfection. For the child growing inside her who would never know the family she had once imagined. For the woman she might have become if she hadn't surrendered her identity to become Mrs. Alexander Grant. But beneath the grief was something unexpected. A flicker of possibility, freedom, authenticity, a chance to rediscover the woman who had existed before Alexander. The bright, ambitious girl with dreams of her own. We're going to be okay, she whispered again to her child, the promise feeling more genuine this time. We're going to be more than okay. The elevator doors opened to the underground parking garage where her father's security team waited. Behind her, 12 floors up, Alexander Grant would soon face cameras and reporters, struggling to salvage what remained of his reputation and empire. The divorce proceedings had turned predictably ugly. Alexander, having failed to salvage his public image at the press conference, had shifted tactics entirely. Gone was the contrite husband begging for reconciliation. In his place emerged a ruthless opponent determined to protect what remained of his crumbling empire. His legal team now claimed Sophia had orchestrated the scene at the Polo Lounge to create grounds for divorce just as she discovered Grant Industries' financial troubles. They painted her as a calculating socialite who had deliberately provoked him, then leveraged public sympathy to position herself favorably in the divorce. Most painfully, they had begun suggesting the pregnancy was either not Alexander's or possibly a fabrication altogether, despite medical records confirming both its existence and timing. On this particular morning, Sophia sat in her parents' sunroom, reviewing documents her attorney had sent over. The financial disclosures revealed the true extent of Alexander's deception, not just to her, but to investors, partners, and banks. Grant Industries had been hemorrhaging money for nearly 2 years, with Alexander taking increasingly desperate measures to conceal the losses. "More tea, darling?" Eleanor entered with a fresh pot. Though she'd said little about the situation directly, her support had been unwavering, from attending medical appointments to fiercely protecting Sophia's privacy from persistent reporters. "Thanks, Mom," Sophia set aside the papers, rubbing her temples. "These financial statements make my head spin." Alexander was moving money between accounts like a shell game. Eleanor poured the tea with practiced grace. "Your father suspected as much. Alexander's expansion was too aggressive, too leveraged. Richard warned him last year at the charity golf tournament. He never mentioned that to me." Sophia sighed, placing a hand on her now visible baby bump. "For years of fertility treatments, and he chose this moment to implode our lives. Perhaps the universe has its own timing." Eleanor sat beside her daughter. "This little one may have arrived precisely when you needed the strength to leave." Sophia's phone chimed with a text message from her attorney. Judge denied Alexander's motion to freeze foundation assets. Meeting still on for 2 p.m. She showed the message to her mother. "Small victories. He won't touch your foundation," Eleanor said firmly. "Your father has ensured that." The Chen Family Foundation had been Sophia's one personal achievement within her marriage, a charitable organization she'd built from the ground up 5 years earlier, using her inheritance from her maternal grandmother. Though it bore the Grant name publicly, legally it remained separate from Grant Industries. Alexander's attempt to claim it as marital property had been his most egregious overreach yet. "I should start getting ready," Sophia said, rising with slight difficulty as her center of gravity shifted with her pregnancy. At 17 weeks, her slim frame now clearly showed the changes in her body. "Sophia," Eleanor began cautiously, "are you certain you want to attend this meeting? Marcus could handle it without you. I need to be there. The foundation is mine, the one thing I built that wasn't about being Alexander's wife." She smoothed her blouse over her bump. "Besides, I can't hide forever." Downtown Los Angeles hadn't changed in the months since Sophia had last visited, but her relationship to it had transformed completely. As her driver navigated past familiar buildings, she no longer saw them as backdrops to the life she'd shared with Alexander, but as landmarks in a city she was reclaiming for herself. The offices of Goldstein, Marcus, and Associates occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass tower 20 blocks from Grant Industries headquarters. Inside, Sophia was immediately ushered to a conference room where her attorney, Julia Marcus, waited with 2 paralegals. "You look well," Julia commented, her warm smile contrasting with her razor-sharp professional reputation. At 52, she was one of California's most formidable divorce attorneys and had taken Sophia's case personally. "How are you feeling?" "Growing," Sophia replied with a small smile, resting her hand on her bump. "Any surprises I should know about before they arrive?" "Alexander's bringing new counsel. Lawrence Hargrove." "The corporate raiders attorney?" Sophia's stomach tightened. Hargrove was notorious for scorched-earth litigation tactics. Julia nodded. "Alexander's obviously pivoting to a more aggressive strategy, which tells me he's worried. Our financial forensics team hit pay dirt." Before she could elaborate, the receptionist announced the arrival of Alexander's team. Sophia straightened in her chair, steeling herself for the first face-to-face encounter with her husband since that day in the boardroom. Alexander entered first, followed by Hargrove and 2 associates. The 3 months had not been kind to him. His designer suit hung slightly loose on his frame, deep lines etched around his eyes, the confident swagger replaced by a tight, controlled rigidity. When he saw Sophia, he faltered momentarily, his eyes dropping to her visible pregnancy before quickly averting. "Mrs. Grant," Hargrove spoke first, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "Thank you for joining us today. I understand your condition makes these meetings challenging." My condition doesn't impair my ability to protect what's mine, Mr. Hargrove, Sophia replied evenly. But thank you for your concern. The attorneys handled the initial formalities, establishing ground rules, confirming recording protocols, reviewing the agenda. Throughout this process, Alexander remained uncharacteristically silent, occasionally glancing at Sophia when he thought she wouldn't notice. Let's address the foundation first, Julia proposed, opening a folder. As the court has now confirmed, the Chun family foundation remains Ms. Chungrant's separate property, established with her inheritance and maintained with separate accounting throughout the marriage. We continue to dispute that characterization, Hargrove countered. Mr. Grant invested significant personal time and connections in building the foundation's donor base. Connections he's currently destroying with his public behavior, Julia noted dryly. Alexander finally spoke, his voice tight. I want to be reasonable about this, Sophia. The foundation bears my name. My family name. A name you've dragged through the mud, Sophia responded quietly. The foundation has lost 3 major corporate sponsors since your exhibition at the Polo Lounge, which you precipitated. He shot back, color rising in his face. Alexander, Hargrove cautioned softly. Sophia leaned forward slightly. I've already begun the process of reverting to my maiden name. The foundation will follow suit once the divorce is finalized. You can keep your tarnished brand to yourself. The flicker of genuine hurt that crossed Alexander's face gave her pause. For a moment, beneath the adversarial posturing, she glimpsed the man she had loved, the man who had taken genuine pride in their shared philanthropy, who had once matched her passion for helping others. Hargrove broke the tension. Let's move on to residential properties. Mr. Grant proposes maintaining the Bel Air residence, with Mrs. Grant retaining the Santa Barbara weekend home and a fair cash settlement. Unacceptable, Julia replied promptly. Given Mr. Grant's apparent financial difficulties, we have concerns about the liquidity of any cash settlement. We counter with Mrs. Chun Grant taking the Bel Air residence, which is free of encumbrances, and Mr. Grant keeping the heavily mortgaged Santa Barbara property. As the attorneys continued their clinical dissection of the life Sophia and Alexander had built together, Sophia found herself watching her husband more than listening to the negotiations. His hands, once steady and confident, now fidgeted constantly with his pen, the slight tremor when he reached for his water glass, the shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Despite everything, a flicker of concern rose within her. When the meeting broke for a short recess, Sophia headed for the ladies' room, needing a moment alone. She was washing her hands when the door opened and Rebecca Chun entered, freezing when she saw Sophia. The 2 women stared at each other in shocked silence. Rebecca recovered first. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I can come back later. No need, Sophia replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. I was just leaving. As she moved toward the door, Rebecca stepped aside then suddenly spoke. Sophia, I should tell you I'm not with Alexander. Not anymore. Not since that night. Sophia paused, studying the younger woman's face. Why are you here, then? Deposition. Lawrence Hargrove subpoenaed me. Rebecca looked genuinely uncomfortable. They're trying to build a case that Alexander was under extreme professional stress due to the Kim deal collapsing. Were you in love with him? The question escaped before Sophia could consider its wisdom. Rebecca's expression shifted, something between regret and resignation crossing her features. I thought I was, or maybe I just loved what he represented. Success, power, connections my family always told me I needed to cultivate. She hesitated. He talked about you constantly, even when we were together. Everything in comparison to his perfect wife. Clearly not perfect enough, Sophia said softly. No one could be. The pedestal he put you on was impossible. Rebecca glanced down at Sophia's pregnant belly. I'm sorry. About everything. I truly didn't know about the baby. Before Sophia could respond, the bathroom door opened again, revealing Julia Marcus looking concerned. Sophia? Are you? She stopped abruptly, recognizing Rebecca. Is everything all right here? Fine. Sophia assured her. Just a coincidental meeting. Rebecca slipped past them both, pausing briefly at the door. For what it's worth, Alexander's not the man either of us thought he was. After she left, Julia turned to Sophia with a raised eyebrow. That was Alexander's. Yes, Sophia confirmed. Life is full of unexpected encounters. Are you okay? We can reschedule if this is too much. Sophia straightened her shoulders. No, I want this over with today. What's our next move? Back in the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Alexander looked agitated, whispering intensely with Hargrove. When Sophia and Julia entered, he glanced up, his expression unreadable. Before we continue, Hargrove announced, my client would like a brief private word with Mrs. Grant. Julia looked to Sophia questioningly. 5 minutes, Sophia agreed. In the break room next door, with the door open. Once alone in the adjacent room, or as alone as they could be with attorneys hovering just outside. Alexander seemed to struggle for words. I saw Rebecca in the hallway, he finally said. Yes. She mentioned your team subpoenaed her. Alexander ran a hand through his hair. A nervous gesture she remembered from early in their relationship. This isn't how I wanted things to go, Sophia. Did you have a specific plan for how our marriage would end when you started sleeping with her? The question held more weariness than bitterness. I never wanted our marriage to end at all. He moved closer, stopping when Sophia instinctively stepped back. Everything I did, the deals, the risks, even the indiscretion with Rebecca, it was all to maintain what we had. To be worthy of you. Sophia shook her head in disbelief. Cheating on me was meant to make you worthy? You don't understand the pressure I was under. The company was failing. Investors were pulling out. I was about to lose everything. His voice cracked slightly. Rebecca's family connections were my last hope to save what I'd built for us. For us? Or for your ego? Alexander flinched as if she'd struck him. Maybe both. I don't know anymore. He glanced toward her stomach. How is the pregnancy? The question, so normal and yet so surreal under the circumstances, caught Sophia off guard. Healthy. Active. It's a girl. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. A softening, a glimpse of genuine emotion breaking through the defensive facade. A daughter. He swallowed hard. Would you allow me to be part of her life? After all this is settled. That depends entirely on you, Sophia replied carefully. On whether you become someone she should know. I'm still her father. Biologically, yes. But fatherhood is more than DNA, Alexander. She placed a protective hand over her bump. It's about character, reliability, safety. I won't expose her to chaos and manipulation. Alexander's shoulders slumped. I'm getting help, Sophia. Therapy. A treatment program for the drinking. It started after we lost the second pregnancy. But I never told you. I couldn't be weak in your eyes. The revelation triggered a cascade of memories. Nights when Alexander had been unusually irritable or distant. Mornings when he'd seemed unwell but insisted it was just work stress. Signs she had missed or chosen to ignore. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. You were already carrying too much. The fertility treatments, the galas, maintaining our social obligations. You never complained, never faltered. You were so strong. And he looked away. I was falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. How they had both been performing roles for each other. Both struggling in silence. Both maintaining facades that prevented genuine connection. I'm dropping the custody challenge, Alexander said suddenly. And the claim on the foundation. You built it. It should carry your name, not mine. Sophia studied him cautiously. What prompted this change? Seeing you today. Seeing our daughter growing inside you. He gestured helplessly. What am I fighting for? A company that's nearly bankrupt? Property I can't afford to maintain? My reputation is destroyed either way. What will you do? The question came from a place of genuine curiosity rather than concern. Start over. Sell what's left of Grant Industries. Pay off the debts. Maybe go back to what I was good at before I started believing my own hype. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Remember how we met? When I was just an ambitious architect with a dream of sustainable urban housing. Sophia did remember. The passionate, idealistic man who had swept her off her feet with visions of transforming city landscapes. Before acquisitions and expansions, before the pursuit of wealth had consumed him. You were happier then, she observed. We both were. Simpler times. He hesitated, then added softly, I do still love you, Sophia, despite everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but I wanted you to know. The declaration hung in the air between them. Sincere but irrelevant, like closing a door that had already been locked and sealed. We should rejoin the attorneys, Sophia said gently. If you're serious about these concessions, we can potentially finalize the agreement today. Alexander nodded, his expression resigned yet somehow lighter than before. As they moved toward the door, he paused. One more thing. The press conference where this all started. I was going to announce the company's financial troubles and take full responsibility. That's what Rebecca and I were arguing about at the Polo Lounge. She wanted me to find more investors to deceive. I was finally ready to tell the truth. Why tell me this now? Because you deserved one honest moment between us before it ends. He gestured for her to precede him through the door. Maybe honesty is where I should have begun. Hours later, as sunset painted the Los Angeles skyline in hues of orange and pink, Sophia sat on the balcony of her parents' guest house, a signed preliminary divorce agreement in a folder beside her. The terms were surprisingly favorable, far more generous than Julia had anticipated. Alexander had conceded nearly every point, asking only for reasonable visitation rights once the baby was born, contingent on his continued therapy and sobriety. Her phone chimed with a message from Helen Montgomery. Darling, when you're ready to emerge from hibernation, the Children's Hospital Committee would love your expertise. No pressure. Just know your talents are missed. For the first time in months, Sophia felt a stirring of her former purpose, the satisfaction of meaningful work, of contribution beyond being Alexander's wife or the subject of society gossip. She typed a reply, Lunch next week? I have some ideas for the spring fundraiser. Placing the phone aside, she rested both hands on her growing belly, feeling the flutter of movement that had recently begun, her daughter making her presence known. It's just us now, she whispered, but we're not alone. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden. In the gloaming light, Sophia could just make out the roses her mother had planted decades ago. Blooms that returned year after year, surviving drought and storm, persisting with quiet strength. The former Bel Air mansion had been sold, Alexander having relinquished any claim to it during their settlement. Instead, Sophia had purchased a more modest but still elegant Spanish colonial in Santa Monica, close enough to her parents for support, but far enough to establish her independence. The moving boxes were barely unpacked, creating an obstacle course through rooms still finding their purpose. I think the nursery needs more light, Sophia murmured, standing in the doorway of the room that would soon belong to her daughter. Pale yellow walls brightened the space, but the morning sun didn't quite reach the corner where she'd positioned the crib. We could move it to the east wall, suggested Carmen Diaz, her newly hired assistant. At 26, Carmen brought an efficiency and genuine warmth that had made her indispensable during Sophia's transition. Maybe, or swap the bookcase and changing table. Sophia stepped further into the room but stopped abruptly, placing a hand on her lower back as discomfort radiated through her pelvis. Carmen noticed immediately. Third time you've done that in an hour. Should I be concerned? Just Braxton Hicks? Sophia assured her, though her certainty wavered as another wave of tightness gripped her abdomen. Dr. Patterson said they'd increase toward the end. At 34 weeks, she still had over a month until her due date. Carmen looked unconvinced but didn't push. The foundation board meeting starts in an hour. Should I reschedule? No need. Sophia straightened with determination. First meeting in the new headquarters. I wouldn't miss it. The Chen Foundation, officially renamed 3 months ago, had relocated from its previous offices in the Grant Industries building to a converted craftsman house in Venice. The move represented more than physical distance from Alexander's crumbling empire. It symbolized Sophia's reclamation of her philanthropic vision. As they drove through midday traffic, Sophia reviewed her presentation notes while occasionally shifting uncomfortably in the passenger seat. The discomfort had grown more regular, more insistent, but she pushed the concern aside. Too much remained to be accomplished before she could surrender to the demands of her body. The Foundation's new headquarters buzzed with activity when they arrived. Staff arranging refreshments in the conference room, board members chatting in small groups. Helen Montgomery broke away from a conversation to greet Sophia with air kisses. "Darling, you're absolutely glowing," Helen said, her gaze dropping to Sophia's prominent belly. "Though perhaps a bit uncomfortable, you're carrying quite low." "Just eager to get this meeting underway," Sophia deflected, moving toward the conference room where her father and several other board members had gathered. Richard Chun rose to greet his daughter, his distinguished features warming with affection. At 68, he had semi-retired from his corporate law practice to focus on family and philanthropy, becoming Sophia's most trusted advisor during her divorce and professional reinvention. "Everything set for the presentation?" he asked, helping her settle into the ergonomic chair Carmen had insisted on installing. "All prepared," Sophia confirmed, though another wave of discomfort made her pause mid-sentence. This one felt different, sharper, more focused. Her father noticed. "Sophia, are you all right?" "Fine," she insisted, taking a deep breath as the sensation passed. "Just a busy baby today." The meeting proceeded as planned, with Sophia presenting the Foundation's new 5-year strategic vision. Under her direction, the organization would shift from general philanthropy to targeted support for women and children escaping domestic violence, a cause that had become deeply personal in the aftermath of her own public humiliation. "The shelter renovation project will provide 30 additional family units," she explained, advancing through her presentation slides. "With the Trauma Counseling Center operating on-site, we can provide truly comprehensive." She stopped abruptly, gripping the edge of the table as a pain unlike anything she'd experienced radiated through her lower back and abdomen. This wasn't practice labor. This was something else entirely. "Sophia." Helen's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. When the contraction subsided, Sophia became aware of the room's focus on her, of Carmen hovering anxiously at her side. "I believe," Sophia said with remarkable composure, "we may need to adjourn early. It seems my daughter has her own schedule in mind." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Carmen calling the doctor, Richard insisting on driving Sophia to the hospital, Helen taking charge of the meeting's conclusion. Through it all, Sophia maintained an outward calm belied by the rising panic within. It was too soon. Nearly 6 weeks too soon. In the car, as another contraction gripped her, Sophia finally voiced her fear. "Dad, it's too early. She's not ready." Richard reached for her hand at a red light. "Babies come when they come, sweetheart. The hospital is prepared for this." "Should we call Alexander?" Carmen asked from the back seat. The question hung in the air. Despite the surprisingly amicable conclusion to their divorce, Sophia had maintained minimal contact with her ex-husband. He had honored the terms of their agreement, continuing therapy and remaining sober according to the reports from their liaison. They had spoken briefly each month, formal conversations focused entirely on practical matters related to their child-to-be. "Yes," Sophia finally decided as another contraction began. "He should know. It's his daughter, too." Cedars-Sinai Medical Center embraced Sophia in its institutional calm, the labor and delivery floor efficiently processing her arrival despite her weeks-early status. By the time she was settled in a private room, monitors beeping reassuringly around her, the contractions were coming regularly. For centimeters dilated, the obstetrician informed her after examining her. "This baby is definitely coming today." "But she's early," Sophia protested. "Is she developed enough?" 34 weeks is premature, but not dangerously so," the doctor assured her. "Her lungs should be developed, though we'll have the NICU team standing by just in case. Try not to worry," You're both in good hands. Easier said than done, Sophia thought as another contraction washed over her. Carmen had stepped out to coordinate the flurry of messages and calls from family and friends, leaving Sophia momentarily alone with the reality of what was happening. After years of fertility treatments, a failed marriage, and months of rebuilding her life, the moment had arrived without warning or preparation. A soft knock on the door preceded her mother's entrance. Eleanor had been across town at a charity luncheon but had dropped everything at Richard's call. "Oh, my darling," she said, immediately moving to Sophia's side and pressing a cool hand to her forehead. "I leave you alone for 3 hours and you decide to have a baby." Sophia laughed weakly, then grimaced as another contraction built. Not exactly planned. Eleanor helped her breathe through the pain, practiced from having coached Sophia during the early stages of 2 previous pregnancies, both lost before reaching this point. "Alexander has been notified," Eleanor mentioned casually once the contraction passed. "Your father spoke with him." Sophia nodded, unsurprised that her mother would address the elephant in the room. "Is he coming?" "He asked if you wanted him to." Eleanor studied her daughter's face carefully. "Do you?" The question was more complex than it seemed. Despite everything, Alexander was this child's father. The end of their marriage hadn't erased the history between them, or the fact that they would be linked forever through their daughter. "Yes," Sophia decided. "He should be here for her birth, but not in the delivery room. I need that space to be peaceful." Eleanor nodded with understanding. "I'll have your father tell him." The hours that followed blurred into a progression of increasing pain and medical interventions. As evening approached, Sophia's labor had intensified but stalled at 7 centimeters, leading to discussions of augmentation with Pitocin. Through it all, she remained fiercely focused on her daughter's well-being, questioning each decision, refusing pain medication that might affect the baby. During a brief respite between contractions, Carmen appeared at her bedside. "Alexander is here, in the waiting area. He asked if he could see you, just for a moment." Sophia considered declining. She was vulnerable, in pain, stripped of all pretense and polish. Yet something, perhaps the threshold moment of becoming parents together despite no longer being partners, made her nod. "Just for a minute," she agreed. Between contractions. When Alexander entered hesitantly, Sophia was struck by how different he appeared from the man she had married. Gone was the designer suit, replaced by casual jeans and a simple button-down. His expression held none of the confidence that had once defined him, instead showing naked concern and something close to reverence. "Sophia," he said softly, remaining near the door. "Thank you for allowing me to be here." She nodded, too focused on her breathing to respond fully. "I won't stay long," he continued. "I just wanted to tell you." He paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "I'm in awe of you, of your strength, and I promise I'll be worthy of whatever role you allow me in our daughter's life." The sincerity in his voice reached past Sophia's defenses, touching something she had thought long buried. Not love, precisely, but recognition of the bond they would always share. Before she could respond, another contraction began building. Alexander moved to leave, but Sophia impulsively reached for his hand. He hesitated, then came to her side, allowing her to squeeze his fingers as the pain crested and receded. "Thank you," she whispered when she could speak again, "for coming." "Thank you for creating her," he replied simply, "for carrying her, for giving us both a second chance, even if in different roles than we imagined." Sophia studied his face, noting the clear eyes, the absence of the slight tremor that had marked him during their last meetings. "You look well. 8 months sober," he confirmed. "One day at a time, as they say." A nurse entered to check Sophia's progress, and Alexander moved to leave. "I'll be in the waiting room with your parents. Whatever you need, or don't need, from me, just send word." As he turned to go, Sophia called after him. "Alexander." He paused, looking back. "Her name is Lily, Lily Chin Grant. I thought you should know." Emotion flickered across his features. "It's perfect. Thank you." After he left, the labor intensified rapidly. Within 2 hours, Sophia was fully dilated and beginning to push, her mother on one side and Carmen on the other, offering encouragement through each exhausting effort. "One more big push," the doctor urged. "She's almost here." Gathering her remaining strength, Sophia bore down with determination, feeling the indescribable sensation of her daughter finally emerging into the world. A moment of breathless silence followed. Then a thin, surprisingly strong cry filled the room. "Here she is," the doctor announced, placing the tiny, vernix-covered infant on Sophia's chest. "Your daughter." Sophia gazed down at the scrunched, perfect face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and immediate it eclipsed everything else. "Hello, Lily," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've been waiting so long for you." The NICU team hovered nearby, but after a quick assessment, the pediatrician smiled reassuringly. "She's doing beautifully. 5 pounds, 4 ounces. Excellent APGAR scores. She'll need some extra monitoring because of her prematurity, but I see no immediate concerns." Relief flooded through Sophia as she traced her daughter's miniature features with a gentle finger. Despite arriving early, Lily seemed determined and strong. Like her mother, Eleanor observed with pride. Hours later, after Lily had been examined thoroughly and returned to Sophia's arms, a nurse appeared with a question. "Your ex-husband is still in the waiting room. He says he'll respect whatever you decide, but he'd like to meet his daughter if you're comfortable with that." Sophia looked down at Lily, peaceful now after her first nursing attempt. In her daughter's face, she could see echoes of Alexander, the shape of the nose, the determined chin. Whatever had transpired between them as husband and wife, this new life connected them permanently in a different capacity. "Yes," she decided. "He can come in." When Alexander entered the dimly lit recovery room, his steps were tentative, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He stopped several feet from the bed, visibly emotional at the sight of Sophia cradling their child. "Would you like to meet your daughter?" Sophia asked softly. He nodded, seeming unable to speak, and moved closer as Sophia carefully adjusted the blanket to reveal Lily's sleeping face. "She's miraculous," he finally managed, his voice thick. "May I?" Sophia nodded, and with infinite care, Alexander reached out to touch Lily's tiny hand. As if responding to his presence, the newborn's fingers uncurled and wrapped around his index finger. The simple gesture undid him completely. Alexander's shoulders shook with silent sobs as he gazed at his daughter. "I never thought, after everything." "Thank you, Sophia. She'll need both of us," Sophia said quietly. "Different than we planned, but she'll need to know the best parts of you too." Alexander nodded, carefully extracting his finger from Lily's grasp. "I'll be the father she deserves, not just in name or finances, but in presence and example. I promise you both that." As he stepped back, giving mother and child space, Sophia recognized the truth of the moment. They were no longer husband and wife, but they would forever be Lily's parents. The future would require negotiation, patience, and a new kind of partnership neither had anticipated when they'd stood at the altar years before. "I should let you rest," Alexander said, moving reluctantly toward the door. "But I'll be back tomorrow if that's all right, just for a short visit." "That would be fine," Sophia agreed. "We'll be here for a few days," given her early arrival. At the door, Alexander paused. "Sophia, for whatever it's worth, I think you've found your true strength now. Not as my wife, not as a society figure, but as yourself. As Lily's mother. It suits you more than anything ever has." After he left, Sophia gazed down at her sleeping daughter, contemplating Alexander's words. The journey to this moment had been nothing like she'd imagined, filled with more pain and public scrutiny than she could have prepared for, but also with unexpected growth and self-discovery. In the quiet hospital room, with Los Angeles twinkling outside her window and Lily breathing softly against her chest, Sophia recognized that endings and beginnings often occurred simultaneously. Her marriage had ended, but her most important relationship was just beginning. The carefully constructed life she had lost had made way for something authentic and untested. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of promise, Sophia whispered to her sleeping daughter, "We have a whole world to show each other, little one, and we're just getting started." On this particular Saturday morning in May, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Sophia attempted to coax a spoonful of yogurt into Lily's resistant mouth. "Just one more bite, sweet pea," she negotiated, making airplane noises that once worked but now earned her a skeptical look from her increasingly independent daughter. "No, Mama," Lily declared firmly, pushing the spoon away. "Done." Sophia sighed, recognizing the familiar stubborn set of her daughter's jaw, a perfect mirror of her own expression when facing resistance at Foundation board meetings. "All right, you win this round." As she wiped yogurt from Lily's hands and face, the doorbell chimed through the house. Lily immediately perked up. "Dada?" she asked hopefully, familiar with the Saturday morning routine. "Right on time," Sophia confirmed, lifting her daughter from the high chair. The past 2 years had established a rhythm between the divorced parents. Alexander's visits were consistent, scheduled, and increasingly comfortable as they settled into their new roles. When Sophia opened the door, she found Alexander standing on the porch, looking relaxed in casual weekend clothes, a small gift bag in one hand and a coffee tray in the other. "Good morning," he greeted, his expression brightening at the sight of Lily, who was already reaching for him with grabby hands. "There's my girl." Sophia accepted the coffee he offered, a small ritual that had evolved over months of these exchanges. "She's been asking for you since she woke up. Apparently, I'm not nearly as fun at the park." "That's because Daddy lets her eat ice cream before lunch," Alexander admitted with a conspiratorial smile, settling Lily against his hip. "Don't you, little Lily?" "Ice cream," Lily confirmed enthusiastically, patting her father's cheek with yogurt-sticky fingers. The moment was comfortable, almost domestic, in a way that still occasionally surprised Sophia. The path to this civil co-parenting relationship hadn't been straightforward. The early months after Lily's birth had been tense, with lawyers mediating visitation schedules and communication happening primarily through text messages. But Alexander had remained steadfast in his commitment to sobriety and therapy, showing up consistently for his daughter and gradually earning back Sophia's trust, not as a husband, but as a father. "Before I forget," Alexander said, handing Sophia the gift bag, "the book you mentioned Lily's been asking for. I found a signed copy at that children's bookstore in Venice." Sophia peered inside to find a beautifully illustrated storybook about a little girl planting a garden. "Thank you. That was thoughtful." An awkward moment of silence fell between them, moments that still happened occasionally, when the weight of their shared history pressed against the present. "Oh," Alexander broke the silence, shifting Lily to his other hip. "I meant to tell you I got the job, the sustainable housing development in Oakland. We start design work next month." "Alexander, that's wonderful." Sophia's pleasure was genuine. After selling what remained of Grant Industries to pay off debts, Alexander had returned to his original passion for architecture, focusing specifically on affordable, environmentally conscious housing projects. The journey hadn't been easy. His reputation had required rebuilding from the ground up, but his talent remained undeniable. "It's the project with the Community Land Trust, right?" He nodded, clearly pleased by her interest. 40 units of mixed-income housing, completely carbon neutral. The kind of work I always wanted to do before ambition and pride had led him astray. The sentence didn't need completing. They both understood. "I'm happy for you," Sophia said sincerely. "You seem fulfilled." "Getting there," he acknowledged. "One project at a time." Speaking of which, he glanced at his watch. "We should head out if we want to make it to the farmer's market before nap time. Her bag is ready by the door. Extra clothes, snacks, the usual." Sophia moved to retrieve it. She was up early, so she might crash earlier than normal. "Noted." Alexander accepted the diaper bag, then hesitated. "Would you like to join us? The market has those lavender scones you like." The invitation was casual but represented something significant, a gradual softening of boundaries, an acknowledgement that sharing occasional family outings might benefit Lily. They had done this,